Right, let's mark number 6.1. So what we have there, the first question was you had to calculate the value of P. P is a y-intercept. It's the y-intercept of the straight line and of the parabola. You don't have the parabola's equation, so you cannot use that equation. You use the straight line's equation. The y value is 0, and you get P to be -4 and 0. Everyone fine with that? Okay. 6.2 hence, or otherwise write down the coordinates of Q. So they were referring to the axis of symmetry that was given. So if P is -4 and the axis of symmetry is -1, which was the x value of the turning point, because we know that the x value of the turning point and the axis of symmetry is the same thing. Then I know it is 3 values more. So the other x-intercept will be 3 values more than -1, and therefore it will be 2. So Q is the point 2 and 0. 6.3, calculate the average gradient between P and R. We spoke about that, Average gradient is a normal gradient. They just call it average because it's not a straight line. Okay, so P and R, you just substitute into the gradient formula and you get it to be 3. .4, show that for f, a is equal to -1, b is equal to -2, and c is equal to 0. Show all your calculations. Right. When they say you have to find those values, you are not allowed to use them. Okay? So what some learners do is they go and put the value of a, b, and c that they gave into their equations, and then they go and put in -1 into the x, and they say, see, it works out to 9, so it must be the formula, or it must be the values. That's not what they want you to do. They want you to get and show how to get a to be -1, b to be -2, and c to be 8. Now, there were two ways that you could have gone about in this one. Because I hope you all see we have a turning point and we have our two x-intercepts. Now, I said to the Afrikaans class, this was exactly the homework that we did for yesterday. But then there were a lot of the learners struggling because it's inside of a question paper. It's exactly the same. There's nothing to it. Okay? So you decide whether you're going to use standard form 2 or standard form 3. Please remember, you cannot use standard form 1. Don't let the confusion kick in of them asking for A, B, and C, and then you thinking you have to use standard form 1. Standard form 1 is the simplified format of standard form 2 and 3. If you multiply standard form 2 and 3 out, you always end up getting standard form 1. Right? So I chose to use the turning point, which was -1 and 9, and remember when it goes into the equation, then it becomes +1 and 9 on the outside, right? Then I momentarily borrow another coordinate. You could have chosen Q or P. I chose P. Momentarily you put it in because you want A to be the only unknown. And then you calculate the value of A to be -1. Right? Many learners in the Afrikaans class, they got to there and then they said, no, they don't know how to find B and C. There's not a way to find B and C. You just go and substitute back and then you multiply the equation out. You simplify the equation. So you go back to the equation with your -1. You have your P value and you have your Q value. If they hadn't asked for it to be in an ABC format or for the value of A, B, and C, then that is the standard form. That is the equation of the graph. Okay? But because they're asking for A, B, and C, now I just multiply this thing out. So I square the bracket. This one times itself, this one times 2, this one times itself. Multiply the negative in, and then it works itself out. So that B becomes -2 and C becomes 8. Do you all understand that? And it would have worked the same way if you use standard form 3. Sharp. You get the same answer.
Look, right at the beginning, when you substitute first the P and Q, and then you substitute the
You can do it in one step. Done? Happy? Right. Then they asked you to find the coordinates of S, the point of intersection of F and G. Now, I'm sure you all know finding an intersection, you let the two graphs be equal to each other. Right. And then you get it into standard form, you factorize it, and you get two answers, -4 and 1. But did you notice you already have -4? That was the point P. You now want S. So it's going to be the one that's 1. But you want the coordinate. So you have to take that one and substitute into one of these two equations, rather the straight line. And then you get y to be 5. So S's coordinate is 1 and 5. Happy? Okay. And then that next question, determine the maximum length of TV between the points P and S. Yeah, we spoke about this yesterday, ne? So we said to find the length of that line. We don't know exactly where it is going to be. Like, do you remember yesterday we had the two sums or the two questions? The first question they told us it's at 1.5. And then the second one they said, if I don't know where it is, what is the maximum length? Okay. So I take the length of TV. I keep it in the equation format. So it's the parabola minus the straight line, because the parabola is at the top and the straight line is at the bottom. And then you subtract and you get it into a standard form of -x² minus 3x plus 4. Do you guys notice that's this standard form of this distance is the same thing we got there at number 6.5. Okay. It just so happens to be. I'm just going to repeat what I said yesterday. This quadratic equation is not a parabola on that graph. Okay? This equation or expression represents the length of TV. Because TV can be 0 and then it can increase to a maximum value, and then it will decrease again, which is exactly what a parabola does. So this just represents it. So when I have the equation of a parabola and I want to know what its maximum value can be, I have to find Q. Ne? Q is the y value of the turning point. So what I'm going to do is I substitute into -b over 2a to get an answer of -3 over 2. And then I substitute the -3 over 2 into that parabola. So there was someone who asked in the previous class, can you substitute it into the straight line or into that one or into anything? No, you have to substitute that into this parabola because you're using P to find Q. Okay? And that's how you get 25 over 4. I also did it here on the right hand side using completing of the square, just to show you quickly. So when we complete the squares, remember we take out the negative out of the first two terms. Then I take half of 3 squared and I add it. But then I must also subtract it here. But for it to come out, I have to multiply with that thing in front. So therefore it's minus negative 9 over 4. And the minus and the negative becomes plus. And that's how I end up with the same thing.
Right in the beginning, you take your parabola, you minus it from the straight line because the parabola is above the straight line. Would it ever be that the straight line is above?
Yes, but then it would probably be a happy parabola with the straight line. So the moment that you're going to take the straight line minus the equation of the happy parabola, that parabola is going to become negative. Ne? Because a negative graph gives a maximum value and a positive graph gives a minimum value. So if you swap them around, okay, let's say you make the mistake of taking the straight line first. you're going to get a positive parabola. Okay? And when you get a positive parabola, you will get the wrong answer. I think it will work out to be negative 25/4. And that will be a minimum value because of the positive graph.
So if we do have a graph where the straight line is above, then it will be straight line minus
Yes, yes. Because there's no way, if this parabola is sad, there's no way the straight line can be above it. And there be a distance between them. So if the parabola is happy, the straight line has to be above it to have a length between them. Okay. Right, so yesterday, are you fine with the maximum length? 25/4. Doesn't matter which method you want to use. It's fine if you use this one. I'm just showing you this one to show you I'm clever. Okay, 6.7. I hope that question didn't confuse you. But it is a weird way of them asking it. But if you know your mathematical language, then it should not confuse you. Right? They're asking you, determine the values of x for which x times f of x is smaller than 0. Okay, now if you had to take a very wild guess, where is x? If I put a gun to your head and I tell you, you have to tell me, where is x? Where do you think is x? It's the axis. Okay? So if you think about x, it's going to be negative up to 0, and then it's going to be positive. And now we've spoken about this yesterday as well. What is f of x? That is the y values of the parabola. Okay? The y values of the parabola. So what I did here is I used color. And you guys remember I told you, you don't use highlighters or something to indicate your graphs. But if the graphs are given, then you can highlight your heart out. Okay. Pink is negative. Yellow is positive. Right, so I started with the x. Negative, positive. Then I start with the parabola. Negative, positive, negative. Now I want to find the x values that will give me smaller than 0. And smaller than 0 in English is negative. Now to get a negative is if I have negative times a positive or a positive times a negative. Here, remember this place represents negative infinity. It's negative times negative. So it will be positive here, same color. But here, I've got different colors. Yellow and pink, yellow and pink, yellow and pink, up to there. Then I've got yellow and yellow, yellow and yellow, so that will be positive again. And then I've got yellow and pink, that will be negative again. So do you all agree with me? It will be from here to there, and then it will be from there to infinity. Because from negative infinity up to -4, it both will be negative. But between -4 and 0, one will be positive and the other will be negative. From 0 to 2, both will be positive. From 2 to infinity, one will be positive and one will be negative. So my answer will be from -4 to 0, neither included. Okay? And then from 2 to infinity, none of them included. Because they're only asking smaller than. There is your answer as well. Do you all understand that? Go. You can page on to question 6 of DBE November 2017. I'm going to do that question with you, and then you are going to do number 5 for homework. It's just on the next page. So on the next page you can check there. It's a straightforward equation of a parabola where they ask you for the turning point, the y-intercept, the x-intercept. They ask you to sketch it. At 5.5 that might be a challenging one, something you haven't seen but you're going to try it. And then 5.6 is a transformation. We are doing a transformation in question 6 now as well. Okay. So let's start. This is what the graph looks like. 2017 DBE. The first one, determine the x-intercepts of f. Now if you look at the information given there, they've given us the full equation of f, they haven't given us any information on g, and they've given us the coordinate a. Okay, look with me here on the sketch, let's just take a look at some things. Do you see that A is a point of intersection between the two graphs? It's important to take note of that. The other point where they intersect will be what? D. Do you see that D's other critical points as well? It's also the parabola's y-intercept. And it's also the straight line's y-intercept. And looking at the information in the equations, do you realize I actually have D? What is D's coordinate? Coordinate 0 and 6. Okay. So when you see that, you go and somewhere write it down on your graph. It's 0 and 6 because that's another piece of information that I can use. And do you realize that means I already have C in the straight line? Actually. Okay. Question 6.1. Determine the x-intercepts of f. How do we find x-intercepts? Let y be equal to 0 and then we factorize. We have the trinomial, so we can factorize. I'm going to put it on here. I hope you all would have been able to do that without me doing it. No. You can quickly copy there. Okay, I want to get to 6.2 and 6.3. 6.2, they say write down the equation of the axis of symmetry. The axis of symmetry is also something else. What is it? The x value of the turning point. Okay, it can be both. You know how we calculate the x value of the turning point or the axis of symmetry? What's that equation or that formula? Minus b over 2a. So I'm going to write that down, substitute, and then I get x equal to negative half. If I had to calculate the x value of the turning point, listen to what I'm saying. You only needed to do the sum and get negative a half. But they are asking for the equation of the axis of symmetry. Now, an equation has to have an equal to sign, a left side, and a right side. An axis of symmetry is a line that runs through the x-axis. So it cuts the x-axis, which is negative a half. So that's why it's necessary for you to write x equal to negative a half when you write down the axis of symmetry, and not just the number. Okay. Writing just negative a half would not be enough. The next question asks you to determine the range of f. Now this question, they are asking you for the range, but they are actually wanting you to do something different. They are disguising this question. Right? Now I want you to think about when we started with the functions. We started talking about the domain and the range. Now when we think about the parabola, the domain is from negative infinity to positive infinity. There is no restriction on the x values. But on the y values, there are limits and there are restrictions. Depending on it being a happy graph or a sad graph. Né? This specific graph is a sad graph, so I'm sure you can see it's from negative infinity. And then it reaches a maximum value, and then it goes back down to negative infinity. So thinking about the range, it will definitely start at negative infinity, not included. But we don't have the maximum value. The maximum value is something that has two jobs as well. What is the maximum value as well? The turning points y value. How do we get the turning points y value? We take the turning points x value, substitute it into the equation, then we will get the turning points y value, which is also the maximum value, which enables us to write the range. Do you see how scalum they are? So they're asking for the range, but they actually just want you to find the turning points y value. Okay. So I have the turning points x value. I substitute it into the equation. I say f of negative a half. And then I work out the y value as 25 over 4. So we said with the Afrikaans class, this will be the turning points y value or q. This is not part of the answer. I'm writing it there just for you to see, okay? I haven't answered the question that they've asked. They want the range. But now that I have q, the y value of the turning point, I have the maximum value that it reaches. So I can say the range starts y is the element from negative infinity up to 25 over 4, and 25 over 4 will be included. Do you agree with me? Because that's one of the values. That's the maximum value that it reaches before it starts going down. Alright, then I just quickly want to talk about the graph before we answer the next question. A question that they can also ask you is whether a graph is increasing or decreasing. Okay, it hasn't come up yet, but I just want to talk to you about it. So, when you have to answer this question, you have to imagine you are a little man or woman standing at the beginning of this graph, and we always start at the left and we go to the right. And if you were to run on this graph, are you running uphill or downhill to determine whether it's increasing or decreasing? So looking at this straight line, do you agree with me? You will be running uphill all of the time because this graph is increasing the whole time. It will never change. It's increasing for all values of x. But if I look at the parabola, if you're running here, the graph is increasing until we get to a specific place, and then it will be decreasing. Alright. Now what I need to get to is not really that. I'm sure you guys can figure that out by yourself. But at the turning point, we need to determine if the function is increasing or decreasing at the turning point. And I don't really understand why this is because it's a major argument at any mathematical meeting. what is happening at the turning point? Is it increasing or is it decreasing? When it's pretty common sense to me that if something is increasing, it has to reach a constant, a straight, a flat line before it can start decreasing. You cannot go from increase to decrease without having a constant. Do you agree with me? Okay. So if they were to ask you for which values of x is this graph increasing, we will say from negative infinity to negative a half. But negative a half will have to be excluded. And that's what I'm getting to. So at negative a half, it's not increasing. And at negative a half, it's not decreasing. Because it's flat there. For that split second, you won't be walking uphill or downhill. Will you remember that? Okay. Right, the next question they're asking for is to find the equation of g of x. Now that's very easy. We said at the beginning we already have the y-intercept. It is 6. You can substitute it in. And then what I did is I used the coordinate of a to find the rest of the equation. But you could also have used a and d to calculate the gradient, which is m, and then just substitute that one as well, whichever way you prefer to do it. And then I'm going to put 6.5 on as well. That's the average gradient between the points A and D. I don't think that's challenging either. No? Just substitute into the equation of gradient and then you find the gradient to be 1. We need to speak about 6.6 and that's what I want to get at. The transformation. Now listen to me. And you write it there, you make a note for yourself. You don't do any transformation. Do you know what transformation is? Moving. Movement of the graph. Okay? So if they're talking about a reflection or a translation or a whatever, they won't say rotation. Just reflection or translation. You can only transform when your graph is in the PQ form. And if you think about this, it actually makes sense. Because P moves left and right. Q moves up and down. Whereas when it's in ABC format or in the x-intercept format, those things are not doing anything up and down or left and right. So all transformations, you need your graph to be in standard form 2. Now up until now, we haven't had the graph in standard form 2. We've had it in standard form 1. But do you realize we did calculate the x value of the turning point? And we did calculate the y value of the turning point. Now I want to show you how to get that information or how to take that information and put it into your equation. So the first thing, there is the standard form 1. Do you remember when we did the quadratic equation, I told you that A is the same for all of them? So, do you see A is negative 1? So, if I want to rewrite this in PQ format, I'm just going to start and write negative in front of the bracket because that's where A is. And then x is going to be there. It's just x. Okay? Now, what is p? We calculated the x value of the turning point to be negative a half. Now, for that negative a half to go into the equation, you just change the sign. So you literally just write it down, plus a half. The turning point's x value. The axis of symmetry. Just change the sign and put it into the equation. Nope, you don't do anything. No sum, no nothing. Close the bracket square. Now we need to have q on the outside. Okay? We did find the y value of the turning point. It was 25 over 4. That's the normal one. We don't change the sign. And then you just write plus 25 over 4. And you can go and check this afternoon. You can multiply this thing out and you will see it comes to work out exactly to negative x squared minus x plus 6 if you multiply this thing out. Okay. So this is this. This is ABC form. This is PQ form. Do you all understand that? Before I get to answering the question. Okay. Now what they want you to do in this question, you can just look here on the graph, on the board, is they firstly want you to reflect this graph. They are referring to determine the equation of H if H is the reflection of F. Okay. So H is now a graph that's not on this thing. Okay. We are not going to draw it either. We just have to find the equation of this. Now, if I reflect it on the x-axis, imagine I put wet paint here, and reflecting it in the x-axis means you have to fold your page on the x-axis. Do you agree with me? We expect whatever is here at the top to go to the bottom. Okay. So that turning point, which was negative a half and 25 over 4, will now still be negative a half. No, the x value didn't change. But it will be negative 25 over 4. So which one's sign changed? Did x change? No, y changed. And that brings us to something that you're going to make a note of in your book. If you reflect in the x-axis, listen to me, reflect in the x-axis, you go and put a negative in front of y. If they had asked you to reflect it in the y-axis, you put a negative in front of x. Reflection in the x-axis, put a negative in front of y. Reflection in the y-axis, you put a negative in front of it. That's literally all you do. Okay. We expect them to ask the reflection in x-axis, not in y-axis. Okay. Because the reflection in the y-axis would have no effect in any case. So it will just move it left and right. It won't have that big impact. Okay. So I'm saying, because I'm reflecting in the x-axis, I'm going to put a negative in front of the y. So you see, I didn't change anything. I just literally put a negative in front of y. But if you look at that, do you agree with me? It's not in standard form. Because y is not supposed to have a negative. So how do I get rid of that negative? Is I multiply this with a negative. I multiply this. Remember, this is one term. So I multiply, let me finish this one, please. I multiply this with a negative and I multiply this with a negative, and then it looks like this. This one becomes positive, this one becomes positive, and this one becomes negative. This makes sense because this graph that looked like this was reflected in the x-axis, so now it's happy. The positive turning point went down to the negative one. And that's exactly what it looks like there. The negative graph became positive. The positive turning point became negative. Okay. And now, after they did the reflecting, they're also moving this graph 3 units to the right. Now this is that odd friend, ne? Moving to the right. This has to do with P. When everyone is saying left, he's going right. When everyone is saying right, he's going left. So if they want you to move it 3 units to the right, one would think it would be +3. But it's the weird one. So therefore it's not going to be +3, it's going to be -3. Because P is the weird one. It's the halalelu one. Ne? When we say right, it goes left. If that said it had moved 3 units upwards, you would just say +3 at Q, nowhere else. Because Q moves me up and down. P moves me left and right. So therefore, the -3 only goes to P, nowhere else. Up and down will only go to Q, nowhere else. And then you get that answer. Okay. What I want you to do for homework is that number 5, ne? But there's still one question. We didn't get to it with the Afrikaans class either. It's 6.7. They're asking you for which values of x will f of x be greater than 0. You can do that. I'm sure you can. 6.8 is a challenging question. That's a level 5. You can go and, a level 4. You can go and try it and see if you can get it right. Just look there. They are saying the same values it gives you 4. Remember, f of something is y. Ne? So y is 4 and there is a 4 on the graph there. Just go and take a look there. And then you're going to do question 5 for me. This one also has a translation. The graph is shifted 2 units to the right and 1 upwards. So there's no reflecting. Ne? So 2 units to the right is halalelu -2. And 1 unit up, that's the rest of us normal 1 up, plus Q. Q plus 1. Okay. Halalelu, now you won't forget P. Ne?